Okay, so anyway, we're going to talk about a man that had a great impact on American history, is not as well remembered for a lot of reasons why, but still earned a great deal of respect overall. And this program will show you some of the reasons why. We're basically going to track through Tecumseh's life from his birth to his death and his legacy. So here we go. Well, he was born uh, in March of 1768. Some sources I've seen say March 5th, which is interesting because one of my ancestors was born on March 5th, so that's rather interesting. And so historians believe it was near the Scioto River, somewhere in the vicinity of Chillicothe. And of course, that's one of our biggest difficulties doing a program like this because uh, we're talking about a people who did not have a written language, a library, a county clerk. It was all an oral tradition passed down from one generation to the next. But there's still some things. Now he was this is what his name means. It means shooting star, panther across the sky, which I think is really cool. And his early life, he was, of course, a Shawnee, and actually his mother was a Muskegon, and when he was 7, she actually left him in the care of his siblings because he was the youngest and went back to her own people. And so he had several brothers and one sister, and two of his brothers figured very large in his life, and we will see that. Now, this is the Puc Chinois, and I apologize for mispronunciation. I'm not really very au courant on the Shawnee language, which is not a dead language like Latin. It actually does exist, and I'll tell you why a little later on. So he was a prominent Shawnee war chief, and he was killed fighting the British at the Battle of Point Pleasant in 1774. So this was even before our own American Revolution. And this was his brother. The one on the left is Tecumseh, and his other brother is supposed to be Shishikau. And he really was his initial mentor. He taught him how to fight, and basically was sort of the one who made him the man he was. And this print said this is his Tecumseh and his brother, the prophet, from drawing set up and made from life. But the operative word is said. So there's a lot of stuff we don't know that we wish we knew better. And an early role model was a man named Chief Blue Jacket, and he was also a war chief like Tecumseh's father. And he joined the British because there was a major split between the Native American tribes in our Revolutionary period. Some tribes, like the Mohicans, joined with the Americans on promises that they would keep their ancestral lands, and others joined the British. And of the two, the British actually had a much better track record. One of the reasons for our revolution is that the British tried to restrict immigration across the Appalachian Mountains. And he grew up in very troubled times. As you see from this map here, you could see how far the borders of individual states were, and that these were lands that the Delaware, the Shawnee, the Winnebago, these were all already inhabited and owned, but we'll get more about that later. And it actually had a long history because in the 17th century, William Penn in 1682 arrived in what is now Philadelphia. He was granted this land overseas by King Charles II, uh, who actually was responsible for part of our state's name because Penn wanted to name it Sylvania, which is Latin for woods, but the king wasn't satisfied, so he offered the suggestion, which Penn gratefully followed, to name it Pennsylvania, as in Penn's Woods. And this is a Benjamin West uh, uh, painting, actually a print of a painting that is showing William Penn negotiating with the Shawnee about buying the lands. And actually, part of the settlement involved with the Quakers was something called the walking purchase, which Native American tribes have take special issue with because basically it was supposed to be Penn could buy whatever he could walk, but they don't see it quite the same way that we were taught, or at least in schools in Pennsylvania were taught. And we'll get into more of that a little bit later. And now things were a constant source of conflict as more and more settlers, and Boone himself was a special target because he emigrated, his family emigrated from Pennsylvania to a while, and they stayed a while in Virginia, and the whole family moved to North Carolina. And I know that because Daniel's older sister married one of my ancestors, so I'm related to Daniel Boone in some sort of strange 32nd cousin fashion. And now, Boone was actually captured by the Shawnee and adopted into the tribe, which is a high tribute. It wasn't that easy. They didn't take anyone. It was probably as bad as the Velvet Rope at Studio 54, but I digress. And one of the other things that happened that year was that uh, Boone's daughter Jemima and her two friends, Frances and Elizabeth Calloway, were kidnapped by the Shawnee while they were in a canoe, and they were taken west with all the men in Boonesboro in hot pursuit. And the girls, in one way or another, managed to delay, and they did interesting little tricks, like they would dig their heel into the ground, they would stumble against bushes to rip off pieces of clothing. They actually left a trail, so they were pretty cool kids, and these were just teenagers. So eventually Boone escaped, and after that Boonesboro itself was under siege, so it was pretty hot times. And of course, after the war, things did not improve because the Confederation Congress, I mean, the pre-Constitution Congress under the Articles of Confederation, actually mapped out vast areas of territory for the creation of new states, which was exactly what the Shawnee didn't want because it would be on their land. And things came to a head in 1794. It was called the Battle of Fallen Timbers, and it was called such because a huge windstorm had felled many trees on the site, and everybody had to sort of try and fight around that. And anyway, this this battle was very, very costly for the Shawnee and allied tribes because before that, in 1791, another war chief named Blue Jacket had led a fight known today as the Battle of the Wabash against Indiana Governor Arthur St. Clair, and about 1,000 Shawnee, Miami, and Delaware Indians met with 2,000 soldiers. So they were outnumbered 2 to 1. And yet the Native Americans delivered a stunning defeat. It was so bad that President Washington forced St. Clair to resign on the spot. And even today, it is the greatest single victory of Native Americans against the United States. I think you figured out by now that the United States is not the good guy in this story, but we'll go on. And what happened 1794, Fullerton was payback. This time, a larger force came back, and they defeated the Shawnee and the other tribes who were allied with them, and they were forced to sign what is called the Treaty of Greenville, and it's really pretty bad because British support evaporated. They had promised support to the Native Americans, which they didn't give, and that brings up an interesting point because this was the 1790s, after the Constitution, after the Revolution, and the Treaty of Paris in 1783 actually stipulated the British had signed this and agreed to this, that they would vacate all their forts in the Western territories. And in the 1790s, they were still there. But it wasn't that simple for the British either, because one of the reasons why they couldn't really do strong support to people like Tecumseh's tribe was simply that we had named them. Great Britain was our very, very first most favored nation trading partner, which we still do. We pick countries that we think are actually best for trade with us. And so they actually were in a bind. They wanted to keep that. They were also getting involved in a war with France on the continent and on the seas, and they just simply didn't have the resources. And I think the last reason was nobody wanted to go back in and fight another war with the United States. The revolution was very unpopular in Great Britain by the 1780s, and they wanted out. Uh, there was, I guess, a war weariness, which has happened before. In fact, actually, it's happening now with some Americans about Ukraine. It's just the way it goes sometimes. But uh, here we go. Anyway, this is where Tecumseh, he was one of the major chiefs who refused to participate in the treaty in 1795. He disapproved of it and totally disassociated himself from it. And at this point, he was 27 years old. And somebody, when I was talking with this about someone, they asked me if he had any, children, and apparently he never married or had children. His DNA, his line goes down through his siblings, and this is what they had to do. The treaty terms were they literally lost millions, potentially millions of acres of property. I mean, if you look at the map, which we'll see in a minute, Greenville was rather small a bit, but when you look at the overall map, it's pretty bad. And as you could, this is it. Down here is the Greenville Treaty. All the rest of this is what through treaties in subsequent years. And as you could see, the United States was very bad at keeping treaties they made. Instead, they just kept forcing the Indians into situations where new treaties had to be issued, which seemed to be that, oh, well, we won't bother you as long as you give us more land. And now this was the younger brother of Tecumseh, and his name was Tenskwatawa, and he had an interesting background because he was sort of considered to be sort of like a hoodlum kid. He was a drunk. His his name meant someone he makes a loud noise, or the noise maker. But around 1805, he just somehow transformed himself. Nobody knows exactly how. And he became an influential spiritual leader. He denounced the Americans and he called them an offspring of the evil spirit. And he sort of led this homegrown purification movement that promoted unity among the indigenous peoples of North America. He rejected any sort of acculturation into American way of life, and he encouraged his followers to pursue traditional ways. And he was a major influence for Tecumseh. And I found this article from an 1810 Rhode Island newspaper. I mean, Tecumseh was getting important enough to be actually in the media of the day. And this is a blow up of this article, much easier to read. And it says here, Tecumseh occupied the greater part of several days in exhibition of his complaints against the United States, but on Monday last he recapitulated and exaggerated all the injuries which the Indians had received from the whites. Now, it actually started that it was sent by the governor of Ohio to the prophet, said in which the governor attempted to show him the folly of making war upon the United States. And he was ready to listen to any grievances of which he had to complain. But it was just all show. Nothing really came of it. And now this is actually one of the most interesting things about Tecumseh because he was considered to be so eloquent, as you can see by this message on the screen. This is something he actually said, and his even his foes, the people who were writing the notes for the treaty, the newspapers, everybody writing in private diaries, they actually took great pains to preserve his words, which is to our benefit. And this was a really bold idea. He sort of took Tenskwatawa, the original idea of forming more unity among the allied tribes, and he actually wanted to extend it. He literally wanted a confederation from Wisconsin to Georgia, and from New York to what is now present day Michigan. And if it had worked, it would have been quite significant. But it was one of those things where it was the right idea, but probably the wrong time for a lot of reasons. But this is what he wanted to do. He wanted to form a confederation, and it actually did grow. It basically included several thousand warriors, and Tecumseh, as the brother of the prophet, he sort of became a leader. He was sort of like the working arm of the Confederation. He was the one who met with other tribes to try and get them to ally. He was the one who sort of coordinated everything. And and this is something he said. He in 1811 he met with the Governor Harrison, and he was trying to persuade them to halt American expansion, to preserve his people's lands. And this is what he said. Now it's been cut down because from what my sources, but basically this was its intent. This is what he told Harrison. said, I want the present boundary line to continue. Should you cross it, I assure you it will be productive of bad consequences. So he was actually extremely intelligent, well versed, and I don't know if he actually learned any English. Maybe he did, but that's there was no mistaking his meaning. And when things with Harrison broke down, he allied himself with the British, and even though the British hadn't been very productive, an alliance earlier in the 1790s, he really had nowhere else to go. I mean, there were three main antagonists: the United States of America, the Shawnee Nation, and other native peoples, and the British. So it's a Hobson's choice. It's a choice between what is offered and nothing at all. Now, the War of 1812 was a huge opportunity for Tecumseh and other tribes to really force the Americans to retrench. And if you notice up here, a good deal of the war was fought in territory that the Shawnee and other tribes claimed. And this led to the Battle of Tippecanoe. Uh, Now, Tecumseh was not there. He was actually way to the southeast among the Cherokee and Creek peoples because they were facing the same kind of pressure that his people were from Americans. And I mean, I know because my own people in my own family, we went from living on land from the Wampanoags in Massachusetts down to the Seminoles in Florida. So I know. Now the adversaries in the battle were Tenskwatawa and William Henry Harrison, and it was literally a climactic battle for both sides. It was make or break time. And here's some of the statistics. Some 500 to 700 warriors met with an American force of 1,000. Some of them were regular army, which actually was not really a huge amount because the United States was still very uncomfortable with having a standing military. They felt that a military could be called and expanded when they actually needed them. So we've made quite a shift in our attitude since then. But I could see Americans then being very jumpy about soldiers because of their experience with the British. And and this is the rock that Tenskwatawa he exhorted his troops with war cries and tried to marshal his forces to resist the Americans. And it was a massive defeat. Uh, they believe that something like 180 Braves were killed, and they were scattered all over. And this is a newspaper from Kaskaskia, which is in Illinois, of a family that were killed by warriors who had left the battlefield. But that was there was one more battle that Tecumseh and his tribe would be able to make against the United States, and with the help of Britain, they were there too. And this was it. It was called the Battle of the Thames because it's in Ontario, Canada, and this was also a momentous climactic battle, and it didn't turn out well. It was a massive defeat, and Tecumseh was killed on December 5th, 1813. The circumstances of his death, I haven't been able to actually say, but it's basically it said here he Tecumseh led 1,400 troops, and they met a superior force of 5,000 regulars and militia, and an estimated 749 casualties. 665 of them were the British soldiers and the Native Americans, and that turned out to be that. And according to this article here, said the death of this great man, for he was truly such, is desirable on no other account than his hostility to the Americans and his supereminent abilities to unite the various Indian tribes against us. The head being killed, the Confederacy is broken, and we may calculate on a lasting peace on our frontiers. So his death was considered to be basically a solution for eternal peace, that they figured that no other tribes in the West would oppose them after this. They were soon to find out differently. And this is a monument. It's reportedly Tecumseh's grave, uh, but uh, uh, it's a little doubtful whether the bones there are his. According to the best sources available, his body was carried away by his warriors and buried in secret somewhere on the battlefield. But somebody thought that the bones were his. I think the only way they could find out would be to open the grave and do DNA testing on living, relatives and his remains. And that's not going to be an option. And because the Pequot tribe, which are descendants of the Shawnee, adamantly oppose any attempt to search for his grave or to disinter the remains. According to their religious beliefs, you are left to become one with the earth, and they don't want any disturbances. And this started a long chain. It was literally a legacy of defeat because eventually, the Indian Removal Act of 1830, and literally a full generation after Tecumseh left um, his tribe were taken to Indian territory in what is now the present state of Oklahoma. And now, of course, a lot of attention is given to the Cherokee and the Trail of Tears, but it wasn't just the Cherokee Nation who were removed. The Shawnee were as well. And basically, I mean, William Henry Harrison, he actually uh, reaped a lot of rewards. He became a national hero. And this article was from a newspaper that actually was in uh, Tennessee legislature. They passed a resolution saying what a great hero he was, and newspapers covered it, and there were broadsides, which were pieces of paper with news that were plastered all over the place, like flyers are today in the supermarket, telling people things. And now he was already doing all right. By this point, he was already governor of the Indiana Territory, but it would lead to eventually greater things. And this is what happened. He used the name of Tippecanoe as his successful run as president for the Whig Party in 1840. And one of the slogans which occasionally you still hear today in certain applications, was Tippy Canoe and Tyler too, because Tippy Canoe was Harrison, he was the hero Tippy Canoe, and John Tyler was his vice presidential candidate because being from the Northwest Indiana, he needed a running mate from the South, and which we still tend to do in our politics between, presidents. Uh, in fact, our current president, Biden, is from the East, Delaware, and Harris is from the West, California. So this is something we still continue to do. Now, uh, he was so honored, Tecumseh, that 7 years later, William Sherman was actually named William Tecumseh Sherman in admiration of Tecumseh. And he was an Ohio native. And of course, he came to glory in the American Civil War many years later. And it was that Sherman who had the march to the sea from Atlanta to Savannah and Georgia, which basically ended a good deal of this American Civil War. And the tribe is still there. This is actually their webpage. And one of the things you can do, I found you could actually, uh, for, I think you have to pay for it, but you can actually learn the Shawnee language, and they tell you all their accomplishments, their casinos, how they actually manage things, and they are now recognized in the United States as being an independent nation within the United States, and we're much more willing to honor past commitments than the originators of those commitments were. And they are making their voice known. This is a recent thing where the National Park Service, it came out in a leak to the news just last week saying that in they wanted to have a restoration of a park that was actually built in 1982 in Philadelphia on to mark William Penn's arrival in Pennsylvania. And it's, overlooks the Delaware River, and it was named Welcome because that's where that was the name of the ship William Penn came in, and that was the name of his first house. And but it says here, and this is, I just got this just yesterday, says, I mean, there was a big uproar, I mean, about it. I mean, conservatives complained about removing the statue, which was one of the proposals, and it got very dramatized on some news circles about, you know, Biden plans to remove statue. And, but it was all premature. The NPS, they said that, nothing has been settled. What they wanted was an expanded interpretation of, what the park is there for and what it actually meant to a greater number of people. And it says here, this is from the press release, the NPS plans announced Friday call for an expanded interpretation of the Native American history of Philadelphia in consultation with indigenous nations of the Haudenosaunee, Delaware Nation, Delaware Tribe of Indians, Shawnee Tribe, and the Eastern Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma. And that is something that Tecumseh laid the groundwork for. I mean, if he hadn't done what he had done over 200 years ago, I don't think we would be there today. Now, of course, if you want to know more instead of hearing me talk about it, pardon me, at the library here, they have this book in the collection. You can actually go to the catalog and put a hold on it if you want to read it. And here are other books, a lot of books on American Native peoples relations over 250 years. And another place is that Indiana Historical Society actually has markers that they put on their website. And I would approach these a little carefully because you don't know when these markers were put up. Some of them are historically or hopelessly out of date, but it's the source. And of course, the National Museum of the American Indian in New York is an excellent place to learn more about it from their website, or if you can make a personal visit, because it's a big building. It used to be the U.S. Customs House, and so it's big. And you can also get period newspapers. The Library of Congress actually has a webpage that anyone could go into. It's called Chronicling America, and they actually have period digitized newspapers for the whole United States from 1763 to 1963. So it's a really cool resource. I actually got found it just by putting in his name. I found 83 newspaper sources from the United States. So Tecumseh, as I said before, it was pretty well covered. And then, of course, the National Park Service. And I had to put them in because on the tribal website, I couldn't find anything about their history or about Tecumseh or any of their history. So they're very forward looking. And apparently, they're working with the National Park Service to provide more information about Tecumseh and his people. And he's even on social media. I found several pages on Facebook, and I'm sure some of the other platforms you can find something. So, believe it or not, even though he's been dead a long time, technologically, he's sort of moving along with the times. And that is really the end. So, if anyone has any questions, I hope that they can just ask me, and I'd be pleased to try to answer them as best I can. So, thank you very much for your attention.